When we come to the Ānāpānasati Sutta, we could see that there's a connection between abhijja, that covetousness, and the first of the hindrances. Okay, now the second term is, that we find here, is Dominus, which is normally understood as a feeling of displeasure, a feeling of dislike or sadness. But that kind of feeling is usually or associated with what kind of response to things, what kind of mood of mind.
Aversion.
Who said that? Yeah, aversion, or in terms of what we usually use for the hindrances. Okay, ill will. Yeah. So aversion, ill will. So they're not exactly the same, but there's a correlation between them. So we have here the abandoning or overcoming, having, let me see. So he sees with wisdom the abandoning of covetousness and grief. So this implies overcoming the five hindrances, which the five hindrances are the first group under contemplation of Dhammas. Okay, and then it continues, having seen with wisdom the abandoning of covetousness and grief, he closely looks on with equanimity. Let me just see if we have the Pali here. No, but I think it's sadhukang ajupekati. But the key word here, if we turn the verb into the noun, is upeka, equanimity. Now, where does equanimity belong? Where do we meet equanimity elsewhere?
It's one of the divine abodes, and it's also one of the seven factors.
Yeah, okay. Here we're not concerned with the divine abodes, in which upeka is more like impartiality. But you said the seven factors of enlightenment? Yeah. So upeka is the last of the seven factors of enlightenment. And do the seven factors of enlightenment have any place in the four foundations of mindfulness? Where do they belong?
Number 4.
Yeah, they belong to the fourth foundation of mindfulness. So here we have the first, by overcoming desire, or abhijja and domanassa, desire and displeasure, we could see a reference to the overcoming of the five hindrances, the first set within the contemplation of Dhammas, and then by contemplating that abandoning or looking upon it with equanimity, we see an allusion to the seven factors of enlightenment, which also belong to the contemplation of Dhammas. So we have the first set and the fourth set. And of course, there's not going to be mention of the Four Noble Truths because that doesn't fit in neatly here. But overcoming the barriers and then bringing to maturity the positive factors, which are the seven factors of enlightenment. Okay, so that now takes care of the connection between the 16 phases of mindfulness of breathing and the four foundations of mindfulness. Any questions at this point? Peter?
I wonder if you could say a little bit more about contemplating, what it is, or even how one does it in practice.
Oh, I did that.
Did you do that? Okay, then I'll...
Yeah, I did that the last class.
Okay.
I explained, okay, just very briefly, I'll treat it just very briefly, not in detail. Okay, in the 3 previous sections, as I said, are concerned with focusing the mind in order to develop concentration. Okay, now to switch over to the contemplation of impermanence, at least this was the way my meditation teacher in Sri Lanka taught us. He said that as one is breathing in, first one begins by making the observation that in breathing in, one is breathing in, then when breathing out, one is breathing out, which is not as in the earlier step, but what one is doing now is noting the distinction of the in-breath and out-breath, so that when the in-breath is when the out-breath is occurring, the previous in-breath is no longer occurring, it's gone. Then when you finish the out-breath and turn to the next in-breath, then one recognizes the previous out-breath is no longer occurring, it's gone. So one moves from just the general awareness of the breath with concentration to a distinction of the difference between in, out, in, out. Then one goes on, so there is like already a somewhat coarse perception of impermanence. Then after a certain point, to refine it, one starts to notice the distinction in one in-breath. You could divide it into the beginning of the in-breath, what do we call this? The continuity of the in-breath, or the sustaining the in-breath, the end of the in-breath. And so one sees each stage is different from the others. The same with the out-breath. The beginning is different from sustaining the out-breath, which is different from the end of the out-breath. And even one notes that little moment of pausing between in-breath and out-breath. Okay, and then one refines the attention on that way, and that gives a still finer seeing of impermanence, because one is seeing how each breath has 3 phases. Then, as the attention becomes more refined, one starts noticing that even within one in-breath, one is there are like little pauses and then accelerations, little sort of slowing down acceleration. So one starts seeing the discrete packets within an in-breath and an out-breath, and how each is different from its predecessor and successor. And then it goes more and more sharply until one is seeing each in-breath is like, almost like, to use a spatial analogy, it's like the way you get an image on a computer from pixels, which if you blow up the screen somehow, you see the individual pixels. So each in-breath is like a string of pixels of in-breathing, and each out-breath is like a string of pixels of out-breath, each arising and passing away.
So it's experiential.
Oh yeah, definitely, yeah.
And it could involve discursive thinking to some extent, or it involves
it's not
concepts.
Like a jhanic state where this thinking is completely completely gone. So there is the formulation of discursive thoughts, though it's not, with the mind wandering away from the object, but when recognizes.
And when you contemplate the fading of passion, is that connected as well to the breath, or is that more subtle?
I think what's called, you see, the word here, I explained this in the previous class, which we have the translation here following Jnanamoli, contemplating fading away, which is viraga. And I explained the last time that the word viraga has 2 nuances. The usual, within the more ethical context, is dispassion, the end of raga, which is lust or greed. But within a contemplative context, it's really more fading away or disappearance.
I see. Thank you.
And I recommended last time a book we have in the library, but forgetting like detailed explanation of these contemplations. It's by Venerable Sri Jnanarama. It's the N with a wiggle over the top. Jnanarama. It's called the 7 Contemplations of Insight. It's published by the Buddhist Publication Society in Sri Lanka, but it can be obtained from their North American distributor, which is Pariyatti, Pariyatti, pariyatti.com. Probably it's also...
That again.
Excuse me?
The title again?
The 7 Contemplations of Insight.
Thank you.
And at the author, it's Venerable Matara Sri Jnanarama. Wiggled N-A-N-A-R-A-M-A. Any other questions now on this section? Okay, so now we're going to move from 4 to 7. So how developing the 4 foundations of mindfulness brings the development of the 7 factors of enlightenment. And here we have, it's a somewhat easy, well, it's a partly easy job because we don't have to repeat the whole thing 4 times, but just the first foundation of mindfulness is taken as the model or paradigm. Then the other 3 foundations of mindfulness just follow the same model. Okay, so the explanation begins with section number 30. Okay, so whenever the monk abides contemplating the body as a body, and so on that occasion, unremitting mindfulness is established in him. On whatever occasion unremitting mindfulness is established in the monk, on that occasion the mindfulness enlightenment factor is aroused in him, and he develops it, and by development it comes to fulfillment in him. And if you pay close attention to the sentence, you see that the phrases used are not just alternative statements, are not just synonymous. It's not just a chance succession or sequence of 3 phases, but the sequence is actually meaningful, because what we have here are actually 3 stages in the development of that particular enlightenment factor. So we have, on that occasion, the mindfulness enlightenment factor is aroused in him. And that indicates the initial stage. One is bringing into being that enlightenment factor. One is turning on the ignition, so to speak, or getting the ball rolling with that enlightenment factor. Okay, then the next phrase indicates the process of development. After it arises, then one has to sustain it and strengthen it. And so then this is the middle stage, which is, and it's generally for everyone, long, drawn-out middle stage. He develops it. And then comes with the 3rd phrase, there comes the 3rd stage. By development, it comes to fulfillment for him. So this is the culmination where it reaches full maturity. And you'll see that these phrases are attached to each of the 7 enlightenment factors. Okay, now, so that's the enlightenment factor of mindfulness. Now with section 31, abiding thus mindful, he investigates and examines that state with wisdom. I think the Pali uses the simple word with simple words, tung dhammang. That state, he investigates and examines that state with wisdom and embarks upon a full inquiry into it. Okay, so it seems, though it doesn't, the sutta itself doesn't define what is meant by that state, but I would take it to be the breath itself, the in and out breathing. So he's investigating and examining the in and out breathing with wisdom and embarks upon a full inquiry into it. And one of the verbs here, I think it's the one translated investigation, I think it's pavichayati, or pavichinati, pavichayati, upaparikati, and parivimangsati, I believe. Okay, so these terms indicate that this is a process of investigation. So this would be looking into the breath in terms of, again, the arising and passing away of the phenomena in the course of in and out breathing. So this is a process of investigation. So this is called the investigation of states, or investigation of factors of experience, or investigation of teachings, factor of enlightenment. The Pali for this, whoops. Yes, we don't need these. So here, Dhamma, in the expression Dhamma Vicaya Sambojjhanga, Dhamma is indicated by that state, tung dhammang, but it seems to have, even though a singular is used, tung dhammang, but it has quite a broad range, so I think it could comprise all the factors of experience that are involved when one is examining in and out breathing. So whatever feelings arise, whatever states of mind arise, even though the base of the mindfulness, because this is contemplation of the body, so even though the base is the body, but whatever factors of experience arise in the course of breathing in and out are also being investigated with wisdom. So that they would be investigated in terms of impermanence, fading away, cessation, and then giving up the attachment to them, relinquishment. And so even though it's said that one is investigating these states with wisdom, but this wisdom here apparently is not yet, the wisdom at the culmination of the path, but it's rather the beginning stage of wisdom. It's where the point where one has turned the simple mindfulness of breathing aimed at stronger mindfulness and concentration, turning it towards insight. Okay, then it says that, again, we have the 3 stages of development. Then we have, in one who investigates and examines that state with wisdom, and so on, tireless energy is aroused. On whatever occasion tireless energy is aroused in the monk who's investigating, on that occasion, the energy enlightenment factor is aroused in him. Again, that's the first stage, the initial stage, and he develops it, the middle stage, then it comes to fulfillment in him, the third stage. Okay, then, and it seems what's being described here is, as one is able to observe the arising and passing away of phenomena within the in and out breath, the mind is as picking up, as this is the focus of insight. As the focus of insight becomes stronger, then the mind becomes filled or suffused with a stronger energy, so that those who are engaged in this contemplation, like the need for sleep, diminishes. So if one is practicing like full time, one could get by with just 3 or 4 hours of sleep a night, and one can go on contemplating for 2 or 3 hours at a stretch, and it might seem just like a half an hour has gone by, because there's a lot of energy in the mind. Okay, then what the next factor, in one who has aroused energy, unworldly, or I think a better rendering, niramisa, is non-carnal. Rapture arises. That's because rapture or joy can be either worldly or carnal. The joy connected with sense pleasures or getting worldly benefits. And then this is the joy that comes from spiritual, or actually spiritual joy would be also a good rendering. This is the joy that comes from gaining insight, having stronger samadhi and insight arising. Okay, so that signifies the arising of the enlightenment factor of piti, rapture or joy. Okay, then for one who is enraptured, rapturous. Now, unfortunately, when we use that word, we have to... This translation was done by Nyanamoli originally. Well, actually, I changed his happiness to rapture. So I did this, 1985, 86? Now, some group has come out with a series of books. I think these are these Christian fundamentalists about the rapture. So now the word rapture brings along this connotation of this time when the second coming of Jesus. I've never read any of the books, so I don't know the content. I think this is a time when the second coming of Jesus occurs and the virtuous people get enraptured and lifted up into heaven, and all of the unbelievers and sinners are left behind on earth to meet with catastrophe. So, have pity for poor translators who have no foreknowledge of what's going to happen to the terms that they use decades after they use them. Okay, so for one who is rapturous, then the body and the mind become tranquil. Actually, what happens when rapture or piti initially arises, there isn't that strong tranquility, but rather there's a kind of elation, exhilaration, which comes with sort of the initial bursts of the rapture. But as one goes on contemplating and sort of gets accustomed to the rapture, then it loses its excitement and it sort of settles down. It's sort of like that feeling when you, excuse me for the worldly analogy, but it's like when your old computer has been bogging down and maybe the screen is getting botched up and the memory function doesn't work so accurately. So then one, decides you go to Best Buy or the Apple shop, whatever, and you buy a new computer and you bring it home and it's sealed in the plastic wrapping, then you open it up and you open the screen and press the start button, and it starts so quickly and everything is working smoothly and it looks so shiny and beautiful. Then you feel really joyful and rapturous. Poor Carolyn doesn't have that experience. And then every day, maybe for the next week, as soon as you wake up, you can't wait to open the computer lid and start the machine, waiting to see bang, bang, swiss, swiss, chup, chup, light, light. And new programs and faster programs, more sophisticated programs. But then 2 months, 3 months after you've been using it, you still like it because it's a new, capable, efficient machine, but you've gotten used to it. So that joy of using it has just quieted down and become something that you're accustomed to, something habitual. So then the tranquility sets in. Okay, so this represents the arising of the tranquility enlightenment factor, and then one develops it until it comes to fulfillment. Okay, then comes the next enlightenment factor, when the body is tranquil, and then one is feeling pleasure. Pleasure isn't mentioned as a separate enlightenment factor, but it goes along with that tranquilizing of body and mind. Then the rapture tends to fade into the background, and so the sukha, the pleasure or the bliss, becomes more prominent. And then as the bliss becomes more prominent, then the mind becomes concentrated. So then the concentration enlightenment factor is aroused in him. Then he develops it and it comes to fulfillment. Okay, then as the concentration factor matures, then the text says he closely looks on with equanimity at the mind thus concentrated. And so when he's looking on with equanimity at the mind thus concentrated, now the equanimity enlightenment factor has aroused in him. He develops it and it comes to fulfillment. So that takes us through the seventh enlightenment factor. Okay, then, as I said, the same template or model is used with the other three foundations of mindfulness. So that's how the four foundations of mindfulness developed and cultivated fulfill the seven enlightenment factors. There's something has struck me a little bit strange about the enlightenment factors. Does anybody feel anything a little bit peculiar about the sequence of them? Maybe see if anybody else shares that feeling.
Wisdom,
Yeah, this is exactly what I had in mind. That when we find the expositions, the way the Buddha usually expounds the training in terms of the 3 stages of virtuous behavior, concentration, wisdom. And then when we have this expanded into the 5 faculties, we have faith, energy, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. Similarly with the 5 powers, same as the 5 faculties. But it's a little puzzling why in the 7 factors of enlightenment, the factor that corresponds to wisdom comes in the 2nd place. And if one looks at the 7 factors of enlightenment, it seems almost as though it's running parallel to the sequence in developing samadhi, deeper stages of concentration rather than wisdom, because mindfulness. Okay, we come to rapture. Okay, and then in the formula for the development of the jhanas, we have the 1st and 2nd jhanas have rapture. Okay, then it goes through from rapture to tranquility to concentration. So then in the 2nd jhana, samadhi is mentioned. And then the enlightenment factors go from concentration to equanimity. And then in the sequence of the jhanas, we have equanimity mentioned in the 3rd jhana, and then in the 4th jhana, equanimity becomes fully purified. So it seems here that there's a parallelism, not so much with the usual sequence, virtue, concentration, wisdom, but rather with the sequence of the 4 jhanas, except that the 7 factors of enlightenment have to culminate in something that the 4 jhanas on their own don't lead to, which is what we come to next, which is here called Vijja Vimutti. That's translated true knowledge and deliverance. Well, now I prefer liberation. So we could say that the vijja here, this is the true knowledge, and this we could identify with the knowledge of the destruction of the asavas, the deep flowing defilements, and then the liberation, that is the release of mind that comes when the defilements are all eliminated. And so the sutta then goes into the question, how do the 7 enlightenment factors developed and cultivated fulfill vijja vimutti, true knowledge and liberation? And then the Buddha explains, here the monk develops the mindfulness enlightenment factor, each of the 7 enlightenment factors, supported by seclusion. And then the commentaries usually explain this as being secluded from the mental hindrances, supported by seclusion. Then we have here viraga, but now it's the clearest sense here is dispassion rather than fading away. So it's supported by dispassion, supported by cessation. I think here in the sense that nibbana as the cessation of suffering or the cessation of craving is the aim of the practice. And it's said to be practiced as ripening, maturing in relinquishment. The commentaries give very technical explanations of these terms, but we don't have to go into those technical details. But this is, I would say, that like this is indicating the development of the 7 factors of enlightenment when they've reached that stage of a high level of development, not in the early stages, but now they've all become strong, mature, powerful, and now they're all being developed together. And so now they all converge upon the aspiration to reach that final goal. And so when he develops them in this way, then they'll culminate in that true knowledge and liberation. And thus he ends by saying that is how the 7 enlightenment factors, I would say, are developed and cultivated so that they fulfill true knowledge and liberation. Okay, so that is the end of the sutta. And if you have questions, since it's now 11:25, just jot them down and hold them, and we could have some more discussion. We come back. Let's aim to be here at 12:30, and then we could have some more discussion for a half an hour. Okay, so let us end with the sharing of the merits. Everybody got the sheet? Okay. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakanto sasanang. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva Chirang rakanto desanang akasata chabumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakanto mang parang etavatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe devanumodantu Sabba sampati siddhya etavatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe bhutanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya etavatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe sabbe satanumodantu Sabba sampati siddhya Bhavagopadaya avici hetato etantare satakayupapanna arupya rupicha asanya sanino dukkha pamuchantu pusantu nibbutting. Okay, then we end with we end with 3 half bows. Yeah, and for those who are not able to stay, next week we'll have a class also, and next week we will take the next sutta in the collection. This is the Discourse on Mindfulness of the Body. That'll probably take two sessions. Yeah, don't pull. Oh, okay. No, it's okay.
Contemplation.